The long-awaited game drop, Chase the Skies 1.21.6 has finally been released. This is a summer drop, it's quite small, but there is still plenty to talk about. As always, you'll find the time codes in the description. Choose what interests you, so subscribe and let's get started. Of course, as always, we start with blocks. This time there is only one, Dried Ghast. It can only be found in the Nether and only in the Soul Sand biome. It is generated near the Nether fossils, those figures made of bone blocks. The chance of finding a Dried Ghast near the fossils is approximately 33.3%. When it is in the dry state, black particles came out of it and it also emits ambient sounds. It can be obtained by hand, which is quite strange considering that it is a full-fledged mob. Just dried out, and dry things are very flimsy. If I were the developer, I would require a pickaxe with a Silk Touch enchantment to obtain Dry Ghast. By the way, they can even be moved with pistons. But there is a second way to obtain it, through bartering with piglins. This will be a little more difficult, as the chance of a piglin dropping a Dry Ghast is approximately 2.13%, which is even less than the chance of obtaining an Ender Pearl. But if you don't like the first two methods, you can always create a Dry Ghast. To do this, place soul sand in a workbench and surround it with the Ghast tears. You will get one Dry Ghast. To be honest, I don't really like the fact that we can create it manually. It's a tried mob, but I may be wrong, so correct me in the comments if I am. In fact, it can be used as regular decorative block, but it can also be used to grow two new mobs, Ghastling and Happy Ghast. It's very simple. After the player has obtained a Dry Ghast, it must be placed in water so that it can get hydrated. This can be done by simply placing the block in water or pouring water on the Dry Ghast manually. As soon as the player does this, the Ghast will start emitting green particles of joy. This is a sign that you have done everything correctly. The recovery process is very long, 20 real minutes or one game day. During this time, the Dry Ghast will change its texture 3 times. These are the stages of hydration. There are 4 stages in total. The first is completely dry, the second is partially hydrated, the third is mostly hydrated, and the fourth is hydrated. At each stage of hydration, the Ghast face will also change from sad to happy. It is impossible to obtain Dry Ghast at a certain stage. After the player destroys it, it will return to its dry state. However, if we remove the water, it will gradually return, taking as much time as it took to reach that stage. In other words, the developers have given players the right to make mistakes. After 20 minutes, the Dry Ghast will come to life and become a Ghastling, which will eventually grow into a Happy Ghast. Since we're talking about new mobs, let's start with Ghastling. Technically speaking, it's not even a mob. Ghastling is a child form of a Happy Ghast. Ghastling doesn't even have its own summoning egg, and to summon a Ghastling using a command, we have to type Happy Ghast and specify the desired age. Ghastling have 10 hearts and a life cycle of only 20 minutes. After this time, they turn into Happy Ghast. To speed up this process, you can feed them with snowballs. You will need about a whole stack of snowballs to grow a Happy Ghast from a Ghastling. After being born, the Ghastling will try to find a player or an adult, friendly, non-aquatic mob within a radius of 16 blocks. If it cannot find one, it will remain inactive within 32 blocks of its own home position, where it was born or where it was last interacted with. There is no way to slow down his growth or make him freeze in form of Ghastling. To begin our showcase of the Happy Ghast, we first need to talk about the harness. This is a new item that allows you to fly on a Happy Ghast. The recipe for creating harness is very simple. 3 pieces of leather, 2 glass blocks, and 1 wool block. There are 16 colors available, 1 for each dye. You can also dye a colored harness, which I think is a great solution. Now we can safely move on to the Happy Ghast. As I mentioned previously, it appears from Ghastling, which in turn appears from Dry Ghast. It's very strange, but both the small Ghastling and the huge Happy Ghast have the same number of lives, 10 hearts. I think it should have at least 5 more. The Happy Ghast flies aimlessly around the world, friendly towards players and other mobs. He does not panic when damaged. By the way, normal Ghasts do not react to him in any way, meaning there is no hostility between them. In the overworld, after appearing, the Happy Ghast will fly around its home position within a radius of 64 blocks if it is not harnessed, and if it harnessed, the distance will be reduced to 32 blocks. Logically, it cannot be tamed, but we can lure it with snowballs or a harness. Then it will fly to the player holding one of these items. After equipping the harness, the Happy Ghast can carry up to 4 players on its back. Although the first player to mount it is considered the leader. If the leader dismounts, the next player clockwise will replace them and take control of the Happy Ghast. To get off the Ghast, press the shift key while in the air. The Ghast will freeze in place and will not move until the player completely gets off it. The Ghast will not move even if the main player tries to fly away. This is already provided in the game. Flying on a ghast, it's not complicated. Pressing the forward key will make the ghast fly into the direction the player is looking. Pressing the back key will make it fly into opposite direction, and the left and the right keys will make it fly in the corresponding direction. If you want to go up, the jump key will help you. Logically, the shift key should lower the character, but this key is responsible for the dismount function. That is, you can only go down when the player presses the forward key and looks down. It's a little inconvenient for me, so I'll have to get used to it. As soon as the player dismounts from the happy ghast, it will fly away, but it will still fly within radius of 32 blocks from the last point of interaction if it has a harness. You can only attract it with snowballs. The harness will not help, as it is already equipped on it, and it will not respond. But don't worry, it won't fly too high, as its code is set to always fly closer to the ground, so the players can settle it or lure it. I should note that the happy ghast will burn from lava and fire and cannot shoot fireballs like a regular ghast. As I mentioned, he has few health points, only 10 hearts. However, when he takes damage, he will gradually recover on his own. Moreover, during rain, snow, or when flying at the cloud rendering level, the recovery speed increases significantly. Happy ghast cannot be put in a boat, but it can still be put in a minecart, just like a normal ghast. Another interesting detail is that when the player controls a ghast, the goggles on its harness are lowered to protect its eyes, but as soon as the player releases the controls and stands up, the goggles are instantly raised. Killing a happy ghast will not give you any drops or a small amount of experience. It is also possible to attach boats to it using leashes, but this is a new mechanic that we will talk about later. The game features a new soundtrack by Amos Roddy. This is the composer's first soundtrack for Minecraft. However, he has already made it a name for himself in other games. For version 1.21.5, he wrote 6 new tracks, one of which is the music disc Tears. You can get it in not a quite standard or familiar way. To do this, the player must deflect a fireball from a regular ghast and kill it. In this case, a new disc will drop from the ghast. The track itself is not quite ordinary, but very interesting, as it contains remixed ghast sounds. By the way, the comparator will emit a redstone signal with a power of 10 units. 2 new achievements have appeared in this version. The first one is Stay Hydrated. To complete it, you need to place a dry ghast in water. The second one is Heart Transplanter. To complete it, you need to place a creaking heart between 2 pale oak logs in a correct position. Well, so what? It happens. They forgot to add the achievement to the last year's winter drop. Big deal. Now let's talk about the locator bar. This is a completely new mechanic for the game, or to be more precise, an interface that shows the position of the players on the server. It can even show entities if you configure the locator using a special attribute. But first things first, every time you log into the server, instead of experience bar, you will see the locator bar. It will look like the experience bar, but with the colored circles instead. Of course, you can disable it with the game rule /game rule locator bar false. As soon as the player joins the server, the game will randomly assign them a circle of a certain color, which will be displayed on the locator bar. But if you create a team of players and assign them a color manually, then all players in the team will have dots of the same color, which is very convenient. The locator bar displays icons when another player is within 120 degrees of the direction you are looking. If a player is above or below the camera's field of view, an arrow pointing up or down appears. You may ask how you can hide from this. It's simple. There's several ways. The first is to simply crouch down, and the player will instantly disappear from the locator's view. The second is to put on a mob head or a carved pumpkin. The third, which I think is the most effective, is an invisibility potion. As soon as the player switches to spectator mode, they also disappear from the survival player's locator bar, but at the same time they begin to appear in the locator bar of other players who are in the spectator mode. I would like to add that the display of the levels has not disappeared. It will only be shown when the player gains experience, and then disappear after a few seconds. The developers have also provided customization option for icons, which can be changed using resource packs, which is pretty cool. You can do anything you want and draw anyone you want. The clouds have been slightly redesigned in this update. First of all, clouds are now rendered all the way to the horizon. Previously, they were displayed as a small square within a radius of several chunks. Now everything looks much better. Then they added the cloud distance option, which allows you to increase or decrease the visibility of clouds. So if you like how clouds looked in the previous versions, you can set everything back to how it was. In addition, the clouds have been updated with a new template and a texture. So now you will occasionally see clouds in the sky that looks like the face of a creeper. Of course, what would the new update be without a new panorama in main menu. It has also been updated and looks quite nice. We can see Ghastling, happy ghasts with and without harnesses, but most importantly, if you look closely, you can see the experienced fairy lurking behind the blocks. What did the developers do before taking a screenshot of this place for panorama? I think that will remain a mystery. By the way, in the Bedrock edition, the panorama is exactly the same, except the vibrant visuals graphics mode is enabled. Now we can safely go through the changes. First of all, the bushes with fireflies now emits larger and more consistent particles. Before there were fewer of them, which of course didn't add much charm at night. Now a firework rocket also accelerates the player on elytras if it was used on a block. Previously, it simply activated as if a firework had been launched into the sky. The recipe for the leash has been changed. Previously, it requires 4 strings and 1 unit of slime, but now the slime ball has been completely removed and another string has been added instead. This makes the recipe much simpler and more logical overall. What about saddles? Now every player has the opportunity to create one. To do this, you will need 3 pieces of leather and 1 iron ingot. Press F to pay respect. Due to the fact that it is now possible to create saddle, the developers decided to remove it as loot from chests. At the same time, it becomes possible to remove saddles from mobs using shears. This applies to saddles, horse armor, harnesses, and carpets. However, there are still some restrictions. The saddle cannot be cut off from the Revenger, when someone is riding the horse, when the player is crouching, or using dispensers. Now, in treasure chests, the ancient city, the desert temple, the jungle temple, and the stronghold, we can find between 1 and 5 pieces of leather. This was done intentionally. Previously, we could find saddles there. The texture of the regular ghast has been changed, let's say refreshed, to make it more suitable for the happy ghast. Horses, donkeys, and moles can now be fed carrots to heal, grow, and improve their temper, with the same effect as apples. Something that everyone has probably been waiting for. Wolves, sheep, and pigs now have mirrored legs. They all looked in the same direction. Like this video if you heard about this for the first time. The 5th room has started to generate again in the woodland pension. Before that, for some reason, it wasn't generated due to a bug. The room is completely normal. There is nothing supernatural in it. Just a few allium in pots and couple more in the chest. The fog shader in the game has been updated. Fog is now divided into 2 types, ambient fog and render distance fog. Previously, both of these effects used the same uniform values, but now they have different functions and work differently. Ambient fog limits visibility within environment the player is in, whether it's lava, water, or the atmosphere, and is calculated based on a spherical distance. Rendering distance fog, on the other hand, limits the visibility of the landscape beyond a set distance and uses cylindrical distance to calculate density. As a result, the maximum value of those 2 types of fog is used for each vertex. I should note that everything looks very beautiful during rain. The strength of the effect of splash potion now depends on the distance between the entity hitbox and the point of impact of the potion. If the potion was thrown directly into an entity, it will receive a full effect. If it hits an area where there are several entities, all of them will be affected by an effect of approximately equal strength depending on their distance from the center of their explosion. The spectator now teleports along with entities moving to the other dimensions, but stops observing them. There have been changes to the sound settings, with a new slider appearing that controls the interface, such as button clicks, notifications, and so on. In addition, the buttons have been renamed, and now instead of creatures, the buttons say mobs. But the most important feature related to sounds is notification about the music that is currently playing. By default, this feature is disabled. To enable it, go to the sound settings and turn it on. A new feature has appeared next to this button, allowing you to select how often music will play in Minecraft, which is also very convenient. Now we can talk about the changes to leashes and their new mechanics. First of all, you may notice that they look twice as thick, and they are now more durable. The length at which the leash breaks has been increased from 10 to 12 blocks. This improves the behavior and physics of the leash, making it more stable. This is especially noticeable with entities that are in flight. They can still be carried this way, but if a player wearing elytras decided to use fireworks, the leash will break. Every time the player leads a leashed animal, it will look toward the player and will be less likely to try to turn in different directions. The same applies to entities that are leashed to a fence. They will stand next to it without trying to break free. In addition, now we can have ability to leash animals to each other. However, when attempting to leash an already leashed mob, the current leash will break and the mob will be leashed to the player again. The connection between mobs can be cut with shears, but then other leashes will also be cut. If you want to adjust your caravan of animals, it is better to do it with your hands. At the same time, you cannot steal or cut another player leash. The developers have taken this into account. The dispenser can easily cut the leash from the entity if it is standing directly in front of it. If the mobs have already been tied to a fence, they can either be cut with shears, or conversely, you can take the knot with the mobs in your hand and go on a journey with them, unlike before, when the leash was completely turned off and dropped from the animals. The same applies to leashes leashing. You can easily leash the entire herd of mobs to fence and then unleash only the specific mob you need. But the most important and interesting thing is tying mob to a happy Ghast. Boats can be tied to a happy Ghast and they will calmly transport them wherever you want. This is not an accident, but an intentional game mechanic. It's simple. First, put the mob in the boat, then tie the boat with leash, and finally tie the leash to a happy Ghast. This way the Ghast will even get a separate texture. But what about large mobs such as camels and sniffers? How they can be transported if they don't fit in a boat? The developers have taken care of them too. To do this, you will need 2 leashes and the mobs themselves. You attach the mobs to the Ghast in the same way and transport them where you need them. I should note that hostile mobs such as the Ravagers and Wardens cannot be attached, and they don't fit in the boat. As you might guess, the speed of the happy Ghast leaves much to be desired. Therefore, the developers added a special attribute, flying speed. This means that you can set the desired speed for it when you summon happy Ghast using the command. A new attribute, camera distance, has also been added. It changes the distance between the camera and the player or observing entity when viewed from the third-person perspective. The default value is 4 units, the minimum value is 0, and the maximum value is 32 units. Another very important change has been added to the data packs, dialogues. These are custom dialogues windows that can be created directly in the game. There are several types of dialogue that can be combined and customized. The first one will display various buttons of different sizes, with the different text styles, commands, and even those that call up tooltips and links. There is a dialog window with images that can be changed as desired, and any image can be added. The third type of window has text input, sliders for configuration, checkboxes, and even the ability to change their style. Those who work with the data packs are 100% satisfied. Unfortunately, I am not very familiar with the game code, but the developers have started to slowly improve the code related to shaders. Soon a new graphic settings called Vibrant Visuals should be available. These are kind of shaders, but in order to implement them in the game code need to be improved, changed, and even reworked. I hope that it will appear in the game by the end of the year. Although Vibrant Visuals has not yet been released on the Java edition, it is available on Bedrock. It can be enabled in the graphic settings. There are 2 modes, performance and quality. There is no point in explaining what each mode does. In any case, you can also configure everything manually. Vibrant Visuals adds pixel shadows, beautiful and soft lighting, and water reflections to the game. I think we'll talk about Vibrant Visuals in more detail in a separate video when they are officially released on Java. This time not many splashes were added, they are only 5, which you can see on your screen right now. Among the most important ones are Flint and Steel and Chicken Jockey. Yes, those very phrases from the movie. In addition, they removed the Miner's Welcome splash because it has double meaning, so to speak, and replaced the 10 years of mining and crafting splash with 15 years of mining and crafting. That's what the Chase the Skies update look like. There aren't as many new features as we would have liked, but there were a lot of changes that will definitely affect future Minecraft updates. What do you think? Do you like this update or not? Write your reviews. Maybe someone from Mojang will see them and take them into account. If you had the opportunity to add something to the game, what would it be? Write in the comments. While you're waiting for the next video, check out these ones. They are just as interesting. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell. See you soon, because we're discovering Minecraft in a whole new way.